Thank you. We want to go back out to the protests that are growing in downtown L.A.
Eliana Moreno live overhead at News Chopper 4. Eliana, has the crowd gotten any larger here?
Michael, it appears to be staying the same, but it's still a very active scene here on Alameda, just south of the 101 freeway, outside of the Roybal Federal Building and the Metropolitan Detention Center. When I was zoomed in a little bit more just a few minutes ago, what I could see was that the demonstrators were pushing a large red dumpster towards the front doors of the building, and just beyond that dumpster I could see some federal agents who were armed with shields, and there have been points in time where they have been deploying some sort of irritant gas to try to get the crowd to clear, but they haven't done that. In fact, I see them fanning themselves. I saw a guy down there with a leaf blower trying to just get some fresh air into the area so they can remain here on scene. Again, this is going to be Alameda, just south of the 101 freeway. It's definitely an area that you're going to want to avoid this evening. In terms of the freeway itself, it's still open, but there's always the possibility that the demonstrators could make their way to the freeway, as we have seen in previous demonstrations. But again, Alameda, just south of the 101 freeway, we have a demonstration of about 1,000 people outside of the Metropolitan Detention Center.
And of course, as Ileana mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the LAPD is on a citywide tactical alert. We want to bring in our law enforcement expert, Dr. Errol Southers. Dr. Southers, you with us?
Yes, I am, Colleen. How are you?
We're good. We're watching this crowd in downtown LA right now. They seem to be getting more and more aggressive. From your perspective, you're former FBI, former SWAT with the FBI and local law enforcement. What do the officers have to do at this point? What are they doing?
Well, you've mentioned already that they've declared a tactical alert. So that means that everybody has now been held over on their watch. They will not be going home, or they may even be calling extra resources in. They'll be not handling routine calls for service, and they'll be marshaling everyone to the area to decide on how they're going to deal with the crowd. Obviously, and from what you've described, they'll be wanting to minimize the crowd from moving any further, and certainly from damaging any property or hurting anyone.
Dr. Southers, federal authorities have declared an unlawful assembly here at the detention center. We're getting reports that they have deployed pepper balls and tear gas. Will local authorities be working in conjunction with federal authorities here to disperse the crowd, or is this just separate agencies doing their own thing?
What I would say, and again, I'm not seeing this, but if the federal authorities have already declared an unlawful assembly, they will be trying to disperse that crowd. LAPD will be essentially on a perimeter because the feds have decided to handle it. I don't that you will not see those two agencies merge together. It's not normal to do that to address the crowd. So the feds have decided it's an unlawful assembly, and they will be trying to disperse the crowd or making arrests if they have to when people do not comply and leave the area.
Dr. Southers, how do you de-escalate this at this point? And whose job is that, the LAPD or the feds?
Well, again, I'm going to suggest that since they've declared the unlawful assembly, they've taken the responsibility of how they're going to manage it. It sounds like it's past the point of de-escalation if they're dispersing chemical agents. So the only thing they can do is give the crowd instructions, give them an exit. That's the most important thing, is if you're going to disperse a crowd that you've declared as an unlawful assembly, you've got to give them an exit, and you've got to make sure they all hear you. So that's something that LAPD does routinely when they call in an unlawful assembly, so that legally people can say, we heard the instructions and we complied, and if they do, that's great, and if they don't, then they're subject to arrest.
This behavior that we're witnessing in real time is similar to behavior that we saw over the summer, which gave the Trump administration its authority to bring in the guardsmen here, which every city and county official balked at. Could we likely see something like this again with protests if they continue in this fashion?
It's going to be hard to say. I don't want to have our speculation get ahead of the facts. It certainly could happen that way. I'm hoping that the crowd can be managed, that they can be dispersed, that we can minimize property damage, certainly have no one get hurt, and limit the number of arrests that are necessary. But they will have to take control. and that means getting the crowd to leave or be taken into custody. I wouldn't want to suggest that you need additional resources in the way of people, National Guard or otherwise at this point, but let's just see how this plays out. It was getting dark now, which always presents other issues, and whether this crowd will start to comply and move along away from the area.
We want to remind our viewers this is on Alameda between Temple and Aliso, and that the LAPD has gone on a tactical alert at this point. As we were looking at the picture closer here, Dr. Suthers, instead of getting smaller, this crowd almost seems to be getting bigger.
Yeah, that can happen because what happens typically in these situations is the persons participating in this assembly are calling others. They're on social media. They're telling everyone to come to that location. So that we have seen that as a pattern, and that does make things more difficult as you have more and more people show up. So depending on how localized this is, people may not be able to get to it, but then it may put people in different areas of the city downtown, which exacerbates the problem even more. So it'll be important to establish some kind of containment, some type of perimeter, and then to push people in a direction away from buildings, away from things so they can start to disperse. And typically when that happens, when the crowd does start moving, they will disperse on their own, but that's going to take some work and it's going to take some coordination and strategy.
Providing an exit for these people, the LAPD, it would be their job and their jurisdiction to set up that perimeter and perhaps help these people along?
Yes, it's going to come to that, of course, because they're going to be moving along the city streets, and the federal authorities are going to be most concerned with the federal properties that I'm assuming that this started at. So yes, it will be LAPD's responsibility to marshal these people along the streets, to get them to disperse, hopefully to not to destroy anything along the way, and with a minimal number of arrests and hopefully no one getting hurt.
As we continue to look at this, there's a long stretch of road there just in front of the area. I believe that is Alameda. You see traffic moving on either side. Now, we do know that the CHP has been called in, and they've closed down some of the entrance ramps onto the freeways around there. That would be normal procedure?
Colleen, I'm so glad you said that. You're thinking ahead. You're thinking ahead of the strategy. I was going to say that one of the things they're going to try and do is to keep the crowd off the freeway. So if they've already done that, that's good thinking on the part of the CHP. It'll keep people on the city streets, and then they can have people continue to go along. And as this crowd moves along, you'll find that people will drop off. It's just a normal behavior that happens in demonstrations like this, and hopefully that'll be the pattern. And most importantly, we could minimize the vandalism and the destruction that takes place along the way.
You know, Dr. Suthers, I'm so glad you're with us because we know what the dynamic is with protests like this during the day. But you mentioned during the evening, how will strategies, how will protocols change with nightfall?
Well, we'll be trying to make sure that people stay on the street, that they stay in plain view, that they're not hiding in between buildings, that they're not breaking into buildings. Nightfall presents that whole issue of concealment. And you don't want to be moving down the street with a crowd and then have a crowd get behind you somehow. So they'll have airships up so we can keep an eye on the streets and keep an eye on the buildings, but nightfall does make it more difficult, just for no other reason, just plain visibility and line of sight, that the officers can see all of these people and move them along in a way that they can be managed.
You know, as we look at the pictures here, does it surprise you at all that we're not seeing a skirmish line begin to move into place? You know, the sun sets at 5:15, 5:20 in the afternoon here. To begin to move this crowd, how else would you move them without a skirmish line?
That's a good question, Colleen. I would imagine that skirmish line will take place. Skirmish lines are really challenging, and they take some time to form. It's not as easy as it looks when you have a contingent of officers and just putting them in a line. There's a skirmish line. You've got a line of officers that are going to have certain not less lethal munitions if they have to deploy them. They're in a row. You have other officers that may be behind them that are going to be arrest teams. So it's a very interesting process of putting layers in place before that initial skirmish line that we always see on TV moving the crowd. It's a real strategy of a layered approach. And that's probably what's taking place. And it may seem like it's taking some time because, in fact, it is. They want to make sure they have all the appropriate resources in the right location. So when they start moving, they don't have to do anything in the way of piggybacking to have someone from the rear come to the front.
Yeah, a lot of strategy involved. Dr. Errol Southers, as always, we appreciate your insight and expertise. Thanks for being with us.
No, thank you for having me.
All right, we have with us on set right now Manny Medrano. You may remember he's a former federal prosecutor. He's a defense attorney right now. Manny, you're pretty familiar with this area, aren't you?
I have lived and breathed a ton of time at that Roy Ball federal courthouse. When I was a federal prosecutor, I've tried cases there. I know it like the back of my hand.
So that back area that we're looking at, earlier today, I said we were monitoring this for several hours. I saw traffic going in and out of there in a small group trying to impede the traffic. What comes out of that building?
That is underground parking for government officials, federal judges, et cetera. So people who live, who work in that courthouse. So that's why you have traffic going in and out. And also law enforcement, U.S. Marshals, their DEA is in that building, FBI is also in that building, so that's why.
As we look at this picture here, Manny, from News Chart before, we see the contingency of LAPD lined up here, and we talked about the role that LAPD will play here today. It won't interfere with any actions taken by the federal or the feds out there, but again, they have their own job to do.
Absolutely, and you're going to notice one key difference between local law enforcement, LAPD, and the feds. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but this is the way it's playing out. Under the Trump administration, LAPD is calm, reserved with their actions. They're not immediately going to extreme measures like shooting people. If there were the federal people there in charge of this, I would fear there would be a lot more violence, and then no matter what happens, protesters being federally prosecuted for being there.
Well, let me interject one thing, because again, I was watching this all afternoon here, and I did see federal officers come out. They were armed, but they came out with pepper spray.
Yes.
And they escorted the cars out, and that was several hours. I was watching that this afternoon. There was one person who was put into cuffs there, but for the most part, it seemed like they were very restrained, and the crowd almost seemed to be very aggressive towards them.
Well, okay, first of all, for the protesters, no way do I condone or countenance violence toward law enforcement. That's not permitted, okay? One is allowed under the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to protest. That's the DNA, that's the fabric of our country, correct? But when protesters, if they cross the line, if they try to hurt an officer, if you throw a Molotov cocktail at someone, if you try to take the baton away from an officer, you can be prosecuted from that.
Yeah,
There's
for the
no
most
doubt
part,
about that.
this was just verbal aggression.
Yes.
And the officers, as I said, they were escorting cars out from under that parking garage, and they were armed with what appeared to be some sort of pepper spray. It wasn't dispersed at all, but there was a lot of bullhorns, a lot of noise going on down there.
Yes, well, that's correct. But let's see what happens. You know, one thing I think our viewers need to understand is in L.A., there's been an aggressive prosecution by the feds of protesters. And you may not know this, Colleen and Michael, but the last 5 jury trials in L.A. downtown federal court to go to trial, all acquittals. Now, what does that tell you? That the cases are weak. They're tepid. There's no probable cause. There's insufficient evidence. So I share that with you because I think no matter what happens today, don't be surprised if either today or tomorrow additional protesters are arrested. But were they arrested properly because they broke the law, or were they simply utilizing their First Amendment rights? Can you say Don Lemon, among other people, right?
You know, and it's hard to tell, obviously, from this vantage point. We don't have, we're not boots on the ground, but we are getting reports that, you know, federal authorities, they're taking, you know, debris and bottles and other objects being thrown at them. So they are on the receiving end of, you know, what we call some pretty obscene behavior.
Well, and that's wrong. Again, please, let me be very clear about this. When you cross the line, you face the music, you should be prosecuted. But the issue is, if those people are doing that and there's evidence of that, then prosecute them. God bless the feds for doing that. But if there's people who are simply there with a sign in attendance, if an NBC4 reporter and a camera person are there, they should not be arrested. Okay, they're doing their job under the First Amendment of covering issues for the news.
And we're going to get back to that issue on Don Lemon, but I understand our McCullough Medina is up and ready. Mac, you are close to what we're seeing here?
Yeah, we're in Alameda. We were at Temple. We're walking a little bit closer. You can see here toward the detention center where some of these protesters are. I can tell you that they have somehow dispersed either pepper spray or some sort of gas, because you can still feel it in the air here as we're walking. The area here at Alameda, we did see a large group of people leave here after what we heard was some sort of like shots, probably pepper shots, unclear, but we did hear some shots, and then we saw a few dozen people leaving the area as well. Now, again, there are still 100, maybe a little bit more than 100 people right outside the detention center here on Alameda right now. They don't seem to be moving, even though there are officers on the other end of there. You can see up top here is the LAPD helicopter. They've been circling the area here for the better part of the last 15 minutes or so. They have not shot any pepper spray or tear gas within the last 20 minutes or so, but still what they did do earlier is still lingering here right now, because you can still smell it. And we are a good 70 feet or yards away from the back entrance to that detention center. So that's the latest right now. About 100 or so protesters right outside the back entrance of the Metropolitan Detention Center. Pepper spray has been dispersed in this area. Tactical alert currently underway right now. We're going to continue to watch this. Once we see more, we'll come back to you as well.
Okay, Mac. Again, we have a split screen of Macarla Medina's shot there on the left, Eliana Moreno live in News Chapter 4 on the right. Do we have access to Eliana right now?
Manny, it almost looks like some of the group is dispersing. If they're walking towards Mac, and Mac is headed towards the federal building there, it looks like some of them are leaving on their own accord.
Yes, and good. Okay, because obviously we have First Amendment rights to protest under the U.S. Constitution. But if people are leaving or dispersing peacefully, then that's how these things usually play out when they're done in the correct way.
And we have, we've seen, like I said, the contingency of LAPD there on the ground. We have CHP, as Colleen mentioned earlier, they're blocking the on-ramps and off-ramps to the freeways here, because we've seen these protests oftentimes make their way onto the freeway.
And this is exactly what they don't want to see downtown. You know, we've been telling people that the area on Alameda near Temple is closed off because of protesters, but you see the big Metro bus right there. They're unable, they've been sitting there for quite a while, unable to make that turn there to get out of the area. You see a lot of traffic there. Manny, let me ask you, if people are arrested because of this, what kinds of charges do they face?
Well, it's federal felonies if you assault a federal officer during a protest.
Let's say you just don't disperse.
Well, you know what? Close call, but generally you should not be arrested for that. If you're just there and not doing anything aggressive or violent, like throwing something at the police officers, they have a right to be there. Okay, now, but the flip side of that is law enforcement's going to say, well, wait a minute, look at the traffic jam. People trying to get home. Okay, that causes an unsafe situation for motorists and for pedestrians. So those are close calls. But at the end of the day, if there are arrests arising from what we're seeing right now live on your cameras, it should be for people who cross the line and engage in some sort of violence toward LAPD officers.
All right, Manny, if you can leave me on standby here for a second, we want to bring in NBC4 investigative reporter Eric Leonard. Eric, are you with us?
I am. Hi.
All right, so based on what you're seeing here, the LAPD on tactical alert for our viewers, please explain to us what that all means.
Yeah, so it sounds a little more ominous than it is. Tactical alert is the LAPD's mechanism for keeping people on duty past the end of their shifts when they anticipate needing a lot of police officer bodies doing stuff in different places around the city. So tonight you have this big protest that's developing. It's going to require a lot of person power to deal with crowd control and potentially managing the traffic that we're seeing, the congestion with demonstrators in the street and the buses and the other cars not able to move. It's going to be hours while this is managed, and instead of allowing officers at their various assignments to go home for the night, everybody stays on duty until further notice. That gives them enough people to be there. So the crowd control management of this is probably the first step that the LAPD is looking at managing here, which is try to prevent the demonstration from going further into the streets around downtown LA. It's pretty well contained, or at least it was, on that stretch of Alameda Street at the back end of the Metropolitan Detention Center and the federal complex that also includes the Roybal Federal Building. Now it looks like protesters are moving in a bunch of different directions. The LAPD has a difficult thing that they have to do here, because on the one hand, they oftentimes will try to start pushing protesters in one direction or another, but they've also gotten in trouble a number of times in court for doing something called kettling, which is enclosing the protesters from both ends of a street and not giving people an opportunity to leave if, let's say, they declare this an unlawful assembly, which, if it hasn't been done already, we expect to happen momentarily. There have been a lot of complaints. Manny was just talking about why people get prosecuted at these demonstrations. In many cases, folks who say they tried to leave but were not allowed to leave because they were blocked in from multiple directions by lines of police officers, they sometimes get handcuffed and cited for refusing to disperse. And then a lot of times there are civil lawsuits that follow that, where the demonstrators who were accused of that say, well, you didn't give us an opportunity to leave. That happened a lot during the protests that followed the murder of George Floyd. It's happened again recently with the protests over the summer that had to do with the aggressive enforcement by immigration agents. And then, as we just covered in the news a couple of weeks ago, or last week, the LAPD got ordered by a federal judge to stop using some of its crowd control equipment because of alleged abuses of that, firing less than lethal weapons, one particular kind of them, at demonstrators who were just demonstrating, not actually engaged in some kind of physical confrontation with police or anybody else. In fact, we just heard from the police chief a couple of days ago about his concerns about this very thing. What we're seeing right now, LAPD having to manage a large crowd control type situation where it appears some of the people in the crowd are doing things to try to physically harm either the federal agents or maybe it'll be LAPD officers later. And the chief was saying he's worried about this because the officers can't use this one particular weapon, just called a 40-millimeter launcher. It fires like a foam projectile. It's lack of a better word. It's maybe golf ball sized, a little bit bigger. And it's designed to knock the wind out of you or knock you over. The LAPD is only supposed to use that when somebody is threatening them, when there's a physical confrontation. But what the judge found, Judge Consuelo Marshall, one of the U.S. District Court judges, was that officers very recently had been using those just to inflict pain on people who were otherwise doing constitutionally protected protest things, like standing in the street with a sign or being out there with a bullhorn. So it's going to be a difficult thing to manage, especially as we see people move out of that one spot right in front of the jail garage entrance and now move up and down the street. The other thing I was going to mention is that I think we saw something I haven't seen before, which was what looked like demonstrators pushing a trash dumpster or something and wedging it up against one of the entrances or exits to that garage. I've never seen that happen before. I was, quite frankly, surprised not to see the federal agents who we knew were inside that garage try to do something about that before that was put in place. But that's probably another complication for whatever is going to be done to manage the crowd here in downtown L.A.
All right, Eric, thank you. We're going to stay with this picture right now. Once again, we're looking at these demonstrations going on downtown L.A. They're advising people to stay out of the area. We've been looking at that one corner right there with the LAPD. They've now set up 2 skirmish lines back to back. But the area they're telling people to stay off Alameda. It's closed down. Also, Spring Street between Temple and First Street closed because of the demonstrations. We've been looking, I think this is a Metro bus. If it's not a Metro bus, it might be a food truck. It's kind of hard to tell there, but it's been sitting on that corner for a very long time. There appear to be a group of protesters in front of it, and just behind that you'll start to see the skirmish line. I believe it's the LAPD, and it's double line there.
Yeah, and we see some movement, however, Colleen, with some vehicles here on the street, despite the crowds. There's also another, I believe that's a bus there to the back of it there. Again, movement with that white bus, not so much with the orange or red bus. Can't really tell from my vantage point here. But Maddie, you continue to look at these pictures, and what do you glean from what you're watching here, especially with the presence of the LAPD?
Well, when you have protests of this magnitude, anytime law enforcement shows up, sometimes that tends to throw gasoline on the fire, unfortunately. But law enforcement has to be there to protect citizens, to protect law-abiding people. So you have these two conflicting parties, if you will, right now. The protesters exercising the First Amendment rights and law enforcement trying to make sure that things don't get out of control. It is my hope and prayer that with a little bit more time, everything will dissipate, everyone will go home, and without any extreme violence of any sort.
Once again, we continue to look at these are live pictures downtown. That is a row of LAPD cars, and they seem to be diverting traffic. It looks like almost onto the freeway there. They have not moved in the past hour or so. Yeah,
that third row there off to the left, it seems to be moving in two different directions here. We have obviously this live picture from News Chart before. Do we have access now to Eliana Moreno? Eliana.
Yeah, back with you guys here. Go ahead, Michael.
Perfect. Yeah, so you've seen the situation grow, change. How would you characterize what you're looking at here?
I have seen it become less volatile in the sense that when we got overhead, this group right here, they were still going at it with the federal agents. The agents were throwing irritant gases at them, and the group was fighting back, pushing a large red dumpster toward the front entrance there. But you can see now that that group has decreased significantly, and a lot of them have gone to the south, so gone to that street over there, which would be the area of Alameda and Temple. And all of this activity, for the most part, is along Alameda, but we saw most of them head south. Some of them did head north, but there's a limit to how far north they can go, because this is what they would be running into. You have all of these officers from various divisions. We see officers here from as far as the San Fernando Valley. I saw a unit here from North Hollywood, and the reason for that is that LAPD is on tactical alert, so they're able to pull resources from all over the city to come assist officers here in the LAPD Central Division with this situation. But again, I've seen most of the demonstrators dissipate. We do still have some on scene, though, clearly, and that is causing major delays here through the area. You were mentioning that Metro bus there earlier, and that other bus as well. They're pretty much just stuck. And unfortunately, this is an area where a lot of buses traverse through the area, so they are likely going to have a very similar fate here, since there's really nowhere for them to go with all of these demonstrators still in the roadway.
Ileana, give us an idea of that exact location there. We've been looking at this corner where nothing is moving for quite some time. What is the intersection here?
Yeah, the bigger street here is the one running up and down where all of the officers are located. That's going to be Alameda right as it crosses over the 101 freeway. So we're talking about Alameda at Aliso is where you have those buses that are now stuck. And then, of course, the 101 freeway, I have to talk about that. At this point, I do still see it flowing in both directions, so we don't appear to have any actual freeway closures. I do think that some of the on-ramps and off-ramps may be shut down here by the CHP, just to try to keep people away from this area. But again, 101 freeway remains open, but it is slow, of course, people stopping to take a look at all of the police activity taking place, but still lots of demonstrators here along Alameda in both directions as well.
Leanna, you talk about how traffic here on the 101 continues to flow. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention now the additional buses there joining that one Metro bus that was there prior. We're looking at what, 3 or 4 at this point?
At least.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to be 5 here, and it's a complete bottleneck here. There's really nowhere for them to go as they are basically surrounded by these demonstrators. I did see that one of the buses did get tagged up by a demonstrator, and that is something that we've seen here along a number of buildings here in the downtown LA area. We've seen a lot of graffiti that has been a part of this demonstration today, which is why I haven't been able to zoom in too tight on some of the visuals here, but showing you the wide shot here here. We do still see hundreds of people in the roadway. We also see LAPD officers here that have formed skirmish lines here, so that is preventing the crowd from moving to the north. But there is nothing preventing these folks from clearing out to the south, east, or west. So there's still plenty of opportunities for them to leave the area before the LAPD issues a dispersal order that could potentially result in arrest.
Are they moving at all? You know, when you showed us in front of the federal building there, that the crowd appeared to be smaller. Is this crowd moving anywhere?
Yeah, the crowd in general is a lot smaller. You do still have some people that are standing their ground, though. They are not going anywhere. But for the most part, it looks like most people are clearing out to the south, which is exactly what you want to do in this situation. If you go north, you're going to run right into that line of LAPD officers. They're not going to allow you to go any further north. But there is nothing preventing folks from just clearing out to the south. And so there's no delays to the south. It's not a situation where the demonstrators are being trapped in a corner where they can't get out of the situation without being arrested. They simply can't go north, but they are still free to go in all other directions.
Okay, so just to clarify here, so I get my bearings, there's only a skirmish line here on the north side, no officers present on the south side of the federal building.
Correct. Yeah, there's no officers to the south, east, or west. They are just the ones that we see here to the north. And this is going to be LAPD officers, as far as we can tell. We checked the units, and we saw officers here from Hollenbeck Division, Northeast, and North Hollywood, as I was saying. But, of course, this is all LAPD Central Division, so they're going to be kind of at the lead of it all. But understandably, they're just going to be overwhelmed without the help of LAPD officers from other divisions, just because of the sheer number of people that are in the area, just the issue with traffic control, of course. And then you also have the federal agents who are actually within the federal building. Earlier, I did get to look inside the building. I could see that they were at the door. They had shields to protect themselves, and they were deploying irritant gases. They were shooting off pepper ball rounds, deploying pepper spray. And the smoke that you see here is not that. This is actually just from this vehicle doing burnouts here along Alameda. The LAPD takes notice of things like this. They write down the plate, or they will stop you on site if they can, and your car will be towed away.
Ileana, what is this that we just saw, that smoke there?
Yeah, it was this individual here in the truck was doing a burnout here, so
Okay.
that's the smoke there that we're seeing. It's not part of the gases that the federal agents had been deploying earlier. So it's difficult to tell because it looks exactly the same, but in this case it was that guy doing a burnout there along Alameda.
Eliana, you mentioned LAPD and a potential dispersal order. That has already been issued by the incident commander of the LAPD. Protesters in the area of Alameda between Union and First Street, they have, we are told, 10 minutes to leave or the arrest begins. So this is protocol. This is typically how it happens with your experience, Eliana?
It is typically how they do this. They will issue that dispersal order, and they will say you have 10 minutes to go. And I have found that the LAPD is extremely gracious with those 10 minutes. It ends up getting extended a lot longer than that, just to give people plenty of opportunity to leave the area before they are arrested. So they do say 10 minutes. They repeat it from the ground. They repeat it from the helicopter. They repeat it in multiple languages to make sure that everyone clearly understands that it is time to go, and they do allow people plenty of opportunity to leave the area when that dispersal order is issued.
Ileana, what is preventing those buses from heading south at this point? I get that the Metro bus, or the orange one in the front, seems to be trapped there, but what about the buses behind it? Why couldn't they take a right and just head out?
Yeah, they definitely could go right if they wanted to, but this is what they would be turning into. They would be turning into this crowd of demonstrators, so I think that's what they're trying to avoid. They're just looking right off their nose, and they think that the roadway right in front is the best way to go, and I believe that even gets them into the bus depot, so it might be a better situation for them if they could just proceed straight along Aliso. So that's going to put them to the east. So the way that they're facing is eastbound. So that's where they're trying to go. Obviously, it's very difficult with all of the folks that are in the roadway. They, of course, don't want to run anyone over, which would be very easy to do with all of the people that are running all over. But thankfully, it looks like we're finally starting to see some movement. Yeah, finally.
Eliana, you said that typically LAPD is gracious with that 10-minute warning to disperse. What will we see after that 10th minute? Will we see that skirmish line begin to move forward, perhaps in the southerly position here?
That is exactly what happens. Yeah, they will start to push forward as we're seeing now. So we actually started following these officers when they were by Union Station, which is a little bit further north. So that's where we picked them up, and they started working their way a little bit more south, block by block. So now they are south of the 101 freeway along Aliso. And so, again, that dispersal order will be repeated time and time again, and the officers will continue to inch forward and forward and forward. But, again, on the other end, on the southern end at Temple, the demonstrators are free to go. There's nobody standing there, nobody blocking them. They can simply walk to the south and get out of this situation without getting arrested.
Remind us again, this intersection we're looking at is Aliso and...
Yeah, so this is Aliso and Alameda, near Commercial. I know I've got the map up, and every now and then you'll see Commercial, but it's actually Alameda is the major north-south that's running up and down the screen where you see all of those officers, and then the east-west street, which is going left to right where you see those buses, that's going to be Aliso. And as I move to the south here, I'm going to show you the Metropolitan Detention Center right there, just in the center of the shot. Beyond that is the Roy Ball Federal Building. So again, all of this activity is just on the east side of the Metropolitan Detention Center. It's been an area that has seen a number of demonstrations over the last several months. So folks in the area are pretty used to it now. We actually see demonstrations here almost every day, but the magnitude of today's demonstration, of course, is a lot larger than what we've seen in the last several months.
I'm in awe of how the situation here has changed over the last few minutes here, Eliana, especially with those buses that were sort of jammed up there. They have all seemed to make their way out of the area, including that school bus there, again, making their way past those LAPD units. And again, that skirmish line being pushed forward to get those folks out of the way.
Yeah, we have those buses finally clearing out, and I don't know if they had passengers on board or not, but obviously a very scary situation where you're surrounded by people and you're basically trapped. But thankfully, they are out of the way now, and we still see demonstrators here along Temple, but we also now see officers. And here's something that's a little bit different. Before, I was telling you we only had those officers that were on Alameda facing south. We now have an additional line of officers that is facing to the west. So it looks like the options here for the people at this intersection are starting to become a little bit more limited. So you're not going to be able to come into the intersection of Aliso and Alameda now that LAPD is now virtually on every corner.